أهلا وسهلا كل متابعين صفحة المعهد المصرفي على السوشيال ميديا. بنقول لحضراتكم كل سنة وانتم طيبين. أنا أصريت أن أنا أعمل الفيديو ده قبل ما نبتدي الحلقة الثانية من EBI Talks عشان أقول لكم شكرا على أن الحلقة الأولى من سلسلة EBI Talks حصلت على مشاهدة برقم 39,000، وفي الحقيقة الرقم ده رقم أسعدنا بشدة، وبناء عليه كنت حابب أقول لكم شكرا، وحابب أقول لكم رجاء دايما تواصلوا معانا، ودايما خليكوا مع الحاجات اللي بننشرها لأن هي أكيد هتبقى مفيدة. الحلقة الأولى كانت نجاح غير مسبوق مع الأستاذ طارق فايد، حققت رقم مشاهدة في الحقيقة احنا كنا في منتهى السعادة بيه، وبناء عليه بطلب من حضراتكم ان انتوا تتابعونا. النهارده معانا الحلقه الثانيه مع دكتور مايكل توشمان من جامعه هارفارد، اللي هيقول لنا ازاي التغيير والقياده والابداع بيتاثروا في زمن كورونا. في كل حلقه من حلقات EBI Talks ان شاء الله هنلاقي معلومه جديده، هنلاقي خبرات بنشاركها، هنلاقي اكيد في حافز جديد للشباب عشان يشتغلوا ويتطوروا وينجزوا ويحققوا نجاحات. بشكر حضراتكم وبدعوكم نروح نشوف حلقه دكتور توشمان.
Okay, welcome all to the second episode of EBI Talks. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It depends where you are in any part of the world, and given the time that you're going to view this second episode. Today, we are very happy. We have Dr. Michael Tushman from Harvard University School of Business, and I'm quite confident that this interview will be very, very beneficial, very, very educating, and very, very informative. Let me first introduce Dr. Tushman, which I have to say that I'm lucky enough to be one of his former students. Dr. Michael Tushman is a Beyker Foundation professor. He is the chair of the Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School. He obtained his PhD in 1976 from MIT, and prior to Harvard Business School, he taught at the Graduate School of Business at Columbia University. His work focuses on managing strategic innovation and large-scale change, and on the relations among technological change, senior executive teams, and organizational evolution. At Harvard Business School, he is faculty co-chair of Leading Change and Organizational Renewal, and faculty chair of the Advanced Management Programs. He was faculty chair of the Program for Leadership Development and has taught in Harvard Business School's MBA and doctoral programs. If we are going to list all the awards, scholarly achievements and contribution and recognitions of Dr. Tushman, I think we will need to spare one full episode of EBI Talks to be able to list them all. Hello, Dr. Tushman.
Yes, Mr. Nocir, so good to be working with you today.
It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and I would like to start by asking you the first question.
You're right.
How can we make decisions and develop innovative solutions in time of uncertainty and lack of precise information?
Yes, this issue of making decisions and strategy in this era of COVID and all the uncertainty of COVID is gigantic for leaders, both in the banking industry in Egypt and around the world. The COVID crisis has knocked all our assumptions about what works and what does not work in every industry imaginable. This issue of profound uncertainty that destabilizes the current strategy that you might have, that your banker colleagues might have in their respective organizations, requires your colleagues to experiment, iterate, pivot, learn rapidly. And the key message to me in our interview today, Mr. Nocir, is to increase the capability of your organizations, your member organizations' ability to learn faster than ever and to learn faster than their competitors. So what I'll be talking about in today's session is how do you build organizations that have the capacity to continue to do what they're currently doing really well, and more importantly, during the COVID crisis, to learn with dispatch about how to deal with the new competitive conditions associated with COVID.
Yes, I can see that. Let me elaborate in one thing, Dr. Tushman. To which extent this crisis can enhance opportunities for innovation, boost investors' capabilities, and allowing them to drive change? Do you have any ideas about this? Because many people see only the threat part of the crisis.
Of the COVID,
they don't see the opportunity part of the crisis.
Yeah. In the language that I think about in working with my students at HBS and working with clients is this notion of an opportunity gap and a performance gap. I think the COVID-19 is a classic opportunity gap. Opportunity gaps mean your organizations have to move before others. There's an opportunity in this COVID crisis to reconceptualize banking strategy in the various pieces of Egyptian banking industry or in the United States, to reconceptualize strategy and execute that swiftly. The issue with COVID-19 is we're in this, as you mentioned earlier, we're in this profound era of ferment, this profound era of uncertainty. And many of your colleagues do not know the right strategy right now. It's figuring it out, it's learning, it's pivoting. And once you have a viable strategy, a viable opportunity to move to scale quickly. So I actually like that way of framing it, Mr. Nocir. It's a fundamentally different competitive context within which your colleagues are facing. And some will treat that as an opportunity to move forward, and others as an enormous threat. What I can tell you is that those leaders who code this as a threat oftentimes get very tight and don't learn very well, as opposed to those leaders who treat this as an opportunity and the competitive aperture increases. So I think that coding, threat opportunity coding, is really important circa 2020 and the COVID crisis.
Would you see any opportunities for competitors to collaborate together or enter in partnerships to enhance strategic problem solving and achieve innovative results in such a crisis time?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And that's what's so unique about this period is there's no research on a pandemic. There's nothing I can fall back to on, hey, there's a research on how firms deal with a global pandemic. But it seems to me the opportunities of your banks to work collaboratively for their clients make sense to me. It is to reconceptualize the strategy of an individual bank and reconceptualize the relationships between members of your banking, your various banks in Egypt. So while I don't know the answer to that based on research, it makes sense to me.
Great, but in general, let me say in the States, how usually do you measure the ability of an organization to innovate? Do you think there is any kind of matrix or any quantitative versus qualitative measures that can be used to give a good indication about whether an organization is innovative or not?
Innovative or not, yeah. The measures I would use and the measures we have used in our work, and I think this is more broadly in the field, is the number of what I call, what my colleague Rebecca Henderson calls architectural innovations. These are not incremental innovations, but these are new, where you add or subtract a component to your product or service. I would count the number of architectural innovations, or the number of innovations that are associated with discontinuous underlying technical change. Like you do an ad based on old-fashioned technology versus the web, crowdsourced ideas. So I would count the number of architectural or discontinuous innovations and contrast that to the number of incremental innovations that are still very important. These are better ways of doing what you're currently doing. I would want to separate those from architectural or discontinuous innovation. And we're right now in this era of COVID. I think this issue of how do you build organizations that can be truly innovative. In my work, we call that exploratory innovations, that get away from exploiting what you currently do into exploration. Architectural or discontinuous is really important. And to your last question, Mr. Nصير, whether you do it by yourself organically or whether you collaborate with others, alliances or joint ventures or partnerships, that will depend on your size and your strategic positioning. All I know is that in this era of COVID-19, doing the same thing will not get you to the future.
I fully agree. And we started the interview with something that is quite optimistic and that is somehow rewarding, which is innovation. But now let us jump into the depth of the crisis. How do you see that COVID-19 is changing the business, and how to be successful in such a very dramatic time?
I think COVID-19 changes everything. Again, as we mentioned earlier, it could be coded as an opportunity or as a threat, but COVID-19 changes everything. And great leaders are able to be honest and transparent with their colleagues. Hey, we have an opportunity here. The world has shifted. We have an opportunity to move forward smartly, even though we don't know what the future is. And this COVID crisis is unfolding in front of our eyes. But this notion of building the organization's capacity to learn quickly is what I always fall back on. And maybe in the course of this interview, we'll talk about ideation, incubation, and scaling. But the underlying disciplines in your organizations need to be optimized around learning in a profoundly uncertain context. I'm not sure I answered your question. If I didn't, let's go back to it.
No. It's quite correct. And as you just mentioned, that in such a time, the way you need to redirect your processes and your directions to cope with the crisis might be a priority, so that you can gear all your team, all your resources towards achieving the modified directions. And actually, this takes me to another question with the word agility going around every now and then now.
Yeah.
What do you think of agility? What are the actions, tools, resources needed by an organization to move to an agile framework?
To a what framework? To a
agile framework.
Agile framework. Yes. Yeah. So the issue with agility is, and the way I think about it, is experimentation. It requires an organization to unlearn old behaviors and learn and then relearn new behaviors. The challenge is that you have to continue to do your current business even as you learn and try to be agile. That's what my colleague and I, Charles O'Reilly, call this ambidextrous organization. Ambidextrous organizations are those that can retain the benefits of size and scale and retain the ability to be agile. And again, when I think about agility, what I mean is the ability to learn fast, is to have cultures and structures and capabilities that can tolerate experimentation, that can tolerate failure, that can tolerate learning by doing. In my languages, that can tolerate variation. And once you learn from that variation, being able to select a strategic course of action and then go to scale. So this, to me, agility is a form of organizational learning that takes place in the context of the existing organization that is continually doing whatever it is doing, as the other part of the organization has this agility. To me, the biggest thing about agility in the time of COVID, and let me just talk about HBS, is that our existing, the campus is shut. We no longer have MBA students on campus. We no longer have EBI on campus. We have to deliver our executive programs and our MBA programs virtually. We have to, as an institution, be really agile. We have to experiment. We have to learn. We have to develop a culture of experimentation in order to live into teaching in the era of COVID, where basically no one is around each other physically. That's what I think about as agility, as being able to forget what you have done and be proud of what you have done and completely reimagine what banking is going to be in Egypt in 2020. And all you know as a leader in your respective banks, it's not going to be the same. And it's challenging your colleagues to build different capabilities in themselves, to build a different structure, different kind of metrics, different kind of culture, in order to figure it out fast. That's what I think about as agility, when you profoundly do not know what is going to work. And the world is shifting in front of our eyes.
Yes, I fully agree. Let me try to second what you just said, Dr. Tushman, especially when it comes to the industry of education. We are in EBI. We have decided, just like what you did in Harvard, to shut down our premises, and we only operational online, either through training or through assessment.
Yep.
And a couple of days ago, we were attending a conference, an online conference with the European Banking Institutes Network. And I asked them a question about when do you expect for the in-class training to come back, and what is so-called the new normal, and whether you're ready for this new normal or not. And the answer was that this is the new normal. The education industry and the corporate education and training industry is not going back to the usual in-class training, because people now has tasted already the benefits of the online training and the virtual training, and how effective it is, how efficient it is, and how economical it is as well.
Right.
Therefore, people will be more towards the remote learning. Again, there is kind of a lag between Europe and other countries, other parts of the world. But in the meantime, it will happen. Even sooner or later, it will take some time, and it will happen. This is a drastic change to the industry of learning and education, and absolutely. I think it will impact many other industries as well. Let me take the conversation into a different idea. It's about leadership.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful example. The education industry, whether it's in Egypt or in the United States, whether it's banking or university, is not going back. This is true around the world. And the question will be, do your leaders of your various banks have the capability of figuring out the new business model in education, or in science, or in advertising, or in publishing, whatever? Do they have the ability to figure out this new business model? And all you know is it's not going to go back to the way it used to be. And that's the challenge for leaders, is to be able to change their, what I think is their cognitive aperture. What are our capabilities? How broad or narrow our capabilities? And right now we need new capabilities in education. What's our competitive set? The competitive set is all of a sudden really different. And at the end of the day, who we are and what we do, our identity. And that is, to me, uniquely the role of your senior leaders, is to be able to open up their cognitive aperture, to be able to figure it out in real time. And the only axiom, the only premise is education is not going to go back to the way it used to be. We have learned through this COVID crisis that online, distributed, synchronous, asynchronous education works pretty well, and it's highly cost effective.
But some people have reservations to the idea of remote learning, Dr. Tushman. They say that it is very good when it comes to informative training, but when it comes to skills like leadership, like negotiation, like conflict resolution, it might not be as effective as in-class training. Do you agree with this?
I hope you're right, Mr. Nصير. That I hope you're right, but we don't know what the traditional take is in education. Education is good for facts and figures. How to do a spreadsheet, how to do a PowerPoint, how to do basic training. But sophisticated negotiations, sophisticated strategy, sophisticated leadership, ambidexterity, you have to do face-to-face. I'm not sure that's true. I hope it's true, but as a member of the leadership team, the membership of Harvard senior faculty at Harvard Business School, we have to figure out how to do distance education really well and how to do face-to-face really well. I think about that as exploiting what we currently do and completely exploring into new spaces that we're uncomfortable about. That's why this identity thing that at some point I'd like to talk about is so crucial, that your banking colleagues who are listening to this interview need to think about who their organization is, what it does, and why it's important. Because that will help your organizations learn and pivot in this profoundly uncertain world.
Great. Now to leadership. In EBI, we have just concluded a study about the skills of the future of the banking sector in Egypt. We interviewed all the HR directors in the banks in Egypt so that we can agree on a list of skills that will be needed for the future banker in the coming decades. Talking about leadership and the future, from your point of view, Dr. Tushman, what are the main skills and capabilities of the leader of the future?
And when you say leaders, Mr. Nصير, are you talking about leaders at the very top?
Yes, we're talking about the CEOs. We're talking about the people who are leading, managing, and directing their organizations.
Yeah. Okay. For leadership of senior leaders, circa 2020, I think in this moment is their ability to be brutally honest. Here's where we are. Here's what's happening in our industry, and inspiring hope. Realistically anchored hope that we're going to get through it. So in a crisis, it is being able to be realistic. Here is the data. Here is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have the capabilities of getting through it. So that's in the very moment we're in now. But more broadly, it is being able to, with the leadership team, to be able to create the conditions that the organizations can have this agility we talked about earlier, to create the conditions in their organizations that will permit experimentation, that will permit learning by doing, that will permit making mistakes. That is one of the key learnings we found, is when you're in this notion of learning rapidly, you can only learn if you make mistakes. So the leadership team has to be able to celebrate good mistakes, if you will, where we're learning as we go along. And to be able to build a senior team, and this is probably the most important, is to build a senior team, Mr. Nocir, that can handle the contradictions of what I have called, and Charles O'Reilly and I have called, exploiting what we're currently doing. Because we're going to get through the future, and there will be face-to-face education. So for us at HBS, we have to continue that capability, even as we build the capability to do online, distance, asynchronous education. Those are contradictory strategies. And one of the things we're finding in our research is really great leaders have the ability to hold paradox, to be consistently inconsistent, to be able to do work banking the old-fashioned way, even as you create new banking in Egypt. Those are contradictory, and great leaders, I believe, need to hold on to that contradiction, be able to live in that contradiction, and have senior teams that can handle it. One of the biggest issues that I have found in my work with firms is leaders can say we need to live into this contradictory strategies, but they have trouble dealing with conflict in their teams. Senior leaders must be able to model their own behavior so that we can get the conflict on the table, we can look at different points of view and make a decision. That's point one, being able to build senior teams that can handle conflict and contradiction. What we have found for senior leaders, and it's really, I believe, really important for senior leaders, is to be able to articulate for their organizations a higher order identity, who we are and what we do. For that higher level of identity provides the overarching frame within which these contradictory strategies exist. Let me give you an example. I think when we were together on campus, I talked about this work I was doing and I'm now doing at Children's Hospital in Boston, where the CEO has the identity for Children's Hospital is until every child is well. So she doesn't talk about, profit of her hospital. She doesn't talk about the number of patents for her hospital. She doesn't talk about the number of papers of her cardiologists and pulmonologists. She talks about this kid comes in sick. We have to work together across the organization to bring that kid back to health. And even if we fail, even if this child does not get better, we learn about that disease. That overarching identity, until every child is well, permits her organizations to both exploit doing things the old-fashioned way at Children's Hospital and to explore really rapidly. And in this time of COVID-19, that notion of we're here until every child is well helps them learn fast because we're here for this kid. So I think this overarching sense of identity here at HBS, it's creating leaders who make a difference in the world. And when you have an identity that is that broad, it permits the faculty and the staff to do education the old-fashioned way, like come to campus, please, and to do education in a completely different way, like we're going to deliver it to you online. So if there was one thing that I would recommend that your senior leaders in the banking world in Egypt really think about, it is the identity of their organization. That when people walk in the door, what are we doing? Why are we here? And it has to be not profit and not return on assets, which everyone knows about. It has to be at one level more abstract, and it has to tap people's emotion. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is this identity is an emotionally anchored sense of why we're here. And then under that is all the facts and figures of strategy in any industry, profit, loss, return on assets, which is in service of this overarching identity. So that's a long-winded way of saying senior teams, dealing with tension, dealing with paradox, and being able to hold it together through some overarching sense of who we are and what we do.
It's notable that when we talk about the future and the skills of the leaders, the first thing that you suggest, Dr. Tushman, is honesty and instilling hope.
Yes.
So again, I can see that you put much emphasis on the emotional part of the leadership as a purpose.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So I want to say that again. In this time of crisis, if the listeners of this interview think that they can be not transparent with their colleagues, that's not going to work. People can see through being empty. People can see through not being transparent. This fundamental notion of the role of the leader in reflecting back to his or her colleagues, here's the state of our world. Owning it and providing hope. Not irrational hope, but hope based on, if we do this, then this will happen. So I want to start with honesty about what the competitive situation is now, what the reality of COVID-19 is now, and hope, realistically anchored, data-driven hope to get to the future, and permitting their organizations to learn fast. That to me is the recipe of great leaders in this COVID-19 era. And able to learn, what you have to do is being able to unlearn what got you there right now. And that's, I guess I want to think about bravery, is your listeners to be able to be brave enough to say, the things we did in banking for the past 10 years may not get us to the future. And we should be proud of that and now reinvent what it means to be a banker in Egypt in 2020. So I think about the role of the leaders as incredibly important now in providing that hope, providing that passion, providing that identity, and providing the context where colleagues in his or her organization can learn really fast.
Great. If we're talking about the things that leaders should support and adapt in these days, what would be the mistakes that you would warn all the leaders not to do during these times? What are the most common mistakes that leaders worldwide can make and how to avoid them?
Yeah. To me, the mistakes will be, hey, this COVID-19 will be over soon. We can simply hunker down, consolidate, and be better at what we currently do, and we'll be fine. I think that would be a colossal error. I think that an error would be to fall prey to the inertial forces in any organization that say, hey, our strategy is fundamentally sound. Our culture is fundamentally sound. Our HR systems are fundamentally sound. We're going to hunker down for 6 months and we're going to come into the light. I just think that's a colossal error. I think this COVID discontinuity will restart industries around the world. And the restart will be completely different. I mean, it will require what my colleagues and I have talked about will require punctuated change. And any punctuated change, any opportunistic move we were talking about earlier, Mr. Nocir, any opportunistic move is anchored on a new strategy for your banks. And a new strategy will require a new, what we call organizational architecture, culture, people, process, structure. And the biggest mistake to me a leader can make right now in this era of COVID is to get caught by inertial forces and not break out of the present and recreate the future or create the future. Or said differently, you get stuck with an existing set of capabilities, you get stuck with a competitive set, and you get stuck with an identity is rooted in what you used to do as opposed to what you might do in the future.
So if I understood you correctly, do you think this denial thing is the threat nowadays?
Yeah. Senior teams denial and senior teams stasis, inability to think clearly about a world that is profoundly uncertain is the beginnings of the ability to explore. So this notion of denial, we can hide, we can duck until this goes away, I think is a recipe for great disaster for firms. And I do want to, and I do feel for leaders who I work with. It is, and what the trap is that the things that have made them so great for so many years in highly successful banks in Egypt or highly successful banks in the States will not take them into the future. That's why this issue of courage is so important. It is shedding the past, being proud of the past, and recreating the organizations in a way that fits this post-COVID world.
I have to admit that one of the objectives for EBI Talks that we said before we start the first episode a month ago was to motivate the youth so that they can learn from the experience of those who are seniors and get more energy to do better. And I have to admit that one of the things that was quite motivating to me while attending one of your classes is that, the slogan that you have just mentioned about the hospital, till every child as well. Let me tell you that we're trying to do something similar in EBI these days. We are having a team working on a project, and we use the same slogan, but with a different phrasing, because it is going to be till every young man finds a job.
Correct.
Because what we're doing now is part of our mandate is to educate and train the university students so that they are well prepared to join the banking sector. And we're trying to expand this project so that it can embrace all the Egyptian youth in all universities and be able to equip them with tools and skills and attitude so that they become more capable to join any job in Egypt. And the slogan that we're set for this is till every young man gets a job. We're working on it, and this is something I'd like to give you the credit for, because we're quite motivating for me. My following question, Dr. Tushman, is that you talked a lot about ambidexterity and exploit and explore, the ability to use the two hands. And we were lucky to see this in your classes, and we understood the idea, but I think our viewers have the right to know more about ambidexterity and how people can be good at exploring and exploiting in the meantime.
Great. So just a comment on your until every person gets a job. I mean, this new identity that you're doing at EBI. The key with these notions of identity in terms of hiring is that the extent to which your identity is inspirational. I can go to my parents and say, I'm working for this organization until every child is well. Wow, are you really working in that kind of organization? Or at Google, for many years it was, we're going to organize the world's information. Are you kidding me? That is incredibly motivating. So to attract talent, the extent to which your banks have this identity that is emotional and aspirational, you'll be able to attract better talent. So that's one piece of this identity thing, is it attracts talent to your organization. As long as you live into that. So as long as you actually follow through with organizing the world's information, or until every child is well. So that's a whole other subject. But that's the beauty of these identity statements, is they attract talent to look twice at your organization and not so much at another organization, because I feel good working there. This issue of ambidexterity is something that my colleague Charles O'Reilly and I have been working on for a bunch of years. And it is based on three ideas, and I'll provide clarity if you'd like. One is the notion of dynamic capabilities are rooted in the fact that organizations must exploit what they're currently doing. Like at HBS, it's teaching executives on campus is our history. We have to exploit that once we can open up. And exploring into profoundly uncertain worlds. Asynchronous education, distance education, web-mediated education. So one basic idea across industries is that you can't exploit into the future. The core is not going to get you to the future. It is some combination of the core, what you're currently doing, and explore. That's point one. Point two, what we've discovered on how to do it is you must break out the exploratory organization from the core organization. What we found is that forces of inertia are so strong, you have to separate the explore from the exploit. And the explore organization must have different people, process, structure, and culture compared to the exploit. That's this tension I want your leaders in the banking industry to build into their organizations if they think about ambidexterity. So for example, at this French advertising agency that we have a public case on, it is separating out the crowdsourced advertising world from the old-fashioned advertising world. At Moleskine, the company that does notebooks, it's separating out the notebook business from the digital notebook. That's what we mean by an ambidextrous organization, is have completely different architecture. So it's high differentiation, splitting core from explore. Mr. Nocir, targeted integration, where we're going to share, we're going to leverage capabilities from the core to explore. So for example, at HBS, our Harvard Business School online has to leverage research from the core faculty. So the last thing the dean wants to do is spin it out, because he has to take advantage of the core capabilities of research. So it's high differentiation, targeted integration where there's stuff to leverage, and where we were talking about earlier, really strong senior team integration. The issue with ambidextrous organizations is not the structure, structural separation. It's not targeted integration. That's pretty easy. The issue with ambidextrous structures is having a leader and a team that can handle the past and the future, big and little. And that's where ambidextrous organizations almost always run into trouble, is the leader doesn't have the ability to hold the contradiction, and the team doesn't have the ability to hold the contradiction, and the organization gets stuck in the past. That's what I mean by ambidexterity, is you build into your individual banks in Egypt would have to keep on making the core bank better and better and better, even as it develops this digital bank. And by the way, when the senior leader and his or her team discovers the future of digital, then we're going to integrate it. So it doesn't stay separated forever, but it gets integrated when it's big enough, when it has legitimacy, that is, the clients love it, and it's actually making money. Then you integrate the Explore into the core. That's what I mean by ambidexterity. And we can talk about examples of that if you'd like, but that's the basic idea that Charles O'Reilly and I have been talking about now for a decade.
One angle of looking at ambidexterity is that being able to do two things most people used to do only one of them.
Right.
And I've been teaching leadership classes in one of the American universities for years, and always students put all the guilt, all the load, all the claims at the leader, and they always keep blaming them for all the shortcomings. I always used to answer this question by saying that before looking at your leader, whether he or she is good or bad, look at yourself and see if you are a good follower or not.
Mm-hmm.
How can a leader be a good follower? How a follower be a good leader? How can you see these two things from the point of ambidexterity as well?
Yeah, great question. I think that the greatest leaders out there have this ability, at the senior leaders now, to be able to clarify the identity, clarify the strategy, and build this contradiction. One level below that senior leader, I have to be able to I have to be a great follower of my leadership team and translate that identity and translate that strategy from this level down to my level. So I have to be a good follower in that sense. And then I have to be like a magnificent leader in my particular piece of, my lower level of the organization. Let me give you just a personal example. So I manage, as you mentioned, for the school, the advanced management program. I'm not the leader of Harvard Business School. We have a dean who's the leader of the Harvard Business School. And he's articulated this aspect, creating leaders who make a difference in the world, and the strategy for the school. I have to be a good follower of the overall strategy of the school, Harvard Business School. So in one sense, I have to be a fine follower of the leadership team around the strategy and identity. And I have to be a leader of my faculty and administrative team as we do the advanced management program in the old way and discover the new way, because the old way cannot work right now. So I personally have to be both a leader below me, a colleague of my peers, and learn from my peers, and be a good follower in the organization. So that notion of what's your own responsibility as a middle-level manager is a really important insight, Mr. Nocir. But where I spend a lot of time as both a consultant and as an instructor, because I have the honor to be teaching in the advanced management program, really senior leaders, is I am very nervous when a leader at this level who is making mistakes in his or her organization and points to a lower level, middle level manager, says, oh, hey, this person's not doing his or her job. Well, it's because they're like mixed messages from here. So if it doesn't start well at the top, it's a nightmare below. And that's why I think for your leaders at EBI, boy, their job is really important, is to create the overall context where middle level and lower level leaders can lead as well as follow.
Thank you, Dr. Tushman. My final question is quite personal. Tell us something about Dr. Tushman that is not related to business or teaching. Tell us what you do if you have one spare day, for instance.
Yeah, so what I do if I have one spare day with my wife is we travel and we try to see the world. I've never been to Cairo. I'd love at some point to go to Cairo. So partly in my spare time, my wife and I love to travel. And partly, the other answer to your question, Mr. Nocir, is we have 3 grandchildren. And that is like partly the light of our lives these days with our grandkids. And that is a real joy for us, but in this era of COVID and not being able to actually hug them is a real sadness. So we hope that this era of COVID goes away, but it's sort of the family, the grandchildren, and sort of raising a new set of kids, helping my kids raise their kids. And of course, with my lovely wife, as we try to travel and see the world. That's sort of what we do when there's a day not working.
Make sure to visit Cairo very soon, inshallah, when this COVID-19 goes away, hopefully. We'll be waiting for you.
Yes, great.
I would like to thank you, Dr. Tushman, truly for, as expected, a very informative, educating, and motivating interview. It was a real pleasure for me. Let me tell you that all your students in Egypt who had the pleasure to meet you the last year in Boston is sending all their greetings to you. Yes. We hope to see you soon, inshallah, in much better world after this COVID thing goes away.
Yes.
Stay safe and
great. Say hello to all my friends in Cairo at the EBI, and hope to see you on campus also.
Sure, will do. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.